Hello, in this broadcast, the evening news from the television company Ostankiно. Today in Grozny, the fate of the imprisoned Russian citizens was being decided. Deputies of the State Duma managed to achieve a personal meeting with them. As Iturtas reports, before that, Shahar Dudayev did meet with a group of the deputies of the Russian Duma, headed by the chairman of the Committee on Defense, Sergei Yushchenkov. A preliminary agreement was reached to release all the injured Russian military personnel imprisoned, and the concrete date of the release yet has not been announced. The remainder of the imprisoned Russian citizens will remain in Chechnya for now. Currently, according to Interfax, in prison there are around 120 Russians. Meanwhile, the pause which developed after the ultimatum expired, which was made by the President of Russia to the warring sides in Chechnya, is in its second day. Today, the attempts to develop concrete steps to regularize the situation in Chechnya was reported by the State Duma of Russia. The deputy chairman of the chamber, Valentin Kovalov, stated that the Duma is currently working out 7 principles for the peaceful resolution of the Chechnya conflict, and these principles are as follows. The unlawful armed formations in Chechnya must lay down their weapons. Citizens who voluntarily put down their arms are to be freed from criminal responsibility. Individuals who were captured during armed clashes must be released. The question of national reconciliation must be examined at the Council of Elders of Chechnya. In Chechnya, democratic elections must be held. The Republic must be immediately provided with economic aid, and finally, the guarantor of peace in the Chechnya Republic must be the President of Russia, Boris Yeltsin. The government of Russia intends to undertake the reconstruction of the economy of Chechnya immediately after normalizing the situation there. This was stated today by their Prime Minister Chernomyrdin. He said that the restoration of the industry and ensuring lawful rights of citizens of Chechnya is a priority of the leadership of Russia. Meanwhile, combat in Chechnya last night did continue. Several combat planes today fired missiles at a populated point, Gudarmes, and as well as Shali, as well as conducting an air raid on the former airport of Dosov in the eastern suburb of Grozny, in the area of which a military unit is deployed. Several moments ago, we received a report from our special correspondents, Vladimir Perfilyev and Grigory Brinza from Chechnya. After the 2 days of air raids on strategic objects here, as a result of which now completely out of commission are the air capabilities of Chechnya, residents of Grozny are expecting resistance on land. The opposition, evidently, is preparing new reserves for a decisive attack on the capital of the Republic. Plans are being made also by the shadow cabinet of government of national rebirth. It is headed by a famous man in Russia and in Chechnya, the former national deputy of the Soviet Union, the academic Solombek Haljayev. In essence, today, in Chechnya, in my view, a liberating war is underway against the criminal regime of Dudayev. A group of people has seized power, speculating on the slogans of autonomy and independence. In essence, they have transformed the larger mass of the population into impoverished slaves. We cannot reconcile with this any longer. We never were anyone's slaves, nor will we either be Dudayev's nor anyone else's. The other matter is that, like any liberating war, it progresses with extreme difficulty in the sense that it gradually becomes an internal civil war, that which we must avoid, and that in the name of which I agreed recently to head the government of rebirth, to do everything possible or even impossible so it would not become civil war, in order that the population would understand that by defending Dudayev, they defend not the sovereignty of Chechnya, but defend their own slavery. These days, the Chechnya people are praying for peace, but can't seem to avoid war. And again, about the fate of Russian military personnel who are in Chechnya. As volunteers, not mercenaries, the Federal Service of Counterintelligence of Russia views the imprisoned Russian military. This was stated today by the head of the Center of Communications of the FSK, Alexander Mikhailov. Alexander Georgievich, how would you comment on today's publication in Izvestia about the recruiting by FSK employees of Russian military servicemen to fulfill ostensibly special missions in Chechnya? The material which was published today to a known degree has complicated the situation which we encounter. We had often stated that Chechnya is a subject of the Russian Federation, that any special services of the Army or the Ministry of Internal Affairs view this territory as a territory of the Russian Russian Federation, to which the Constitution of the Russian Federation applies, and hence all enforcement ministries and law enforcement organs must do everything possible to restore constitutional structure in Chechnya. The leadership of the country often had stated that it will maintain contacts with all movements, parties, organizations which support the Russian Constitution on the territory of Chechnya, and therefore the participation of our volunteers, I cannot call them mercenaries, and I would ask mass media to refuse this type of terminology, because Russian people are on Russian territory, and if they are fighting in the interests of the Russian Federation. To speak of mercenaries, especially of some prison today, terminologically is not appropriate and is not true. Not only did the FSK, but the Prosecutor General of the Russian Federation announced that its concrete actions against Chechnya are as in regards to a subject of the Russian Federation. On the fact of mass murders in Chechnya, the Prosecutor General of Russia has launched a criminal case. This was stated at a press conference by the acting Prosecutor General of Russia, Alexei Ilyushenko. A criminal case has been launched. It is under investigation for 2 months already. After the first serious occurrences in Chechnya, a criminal case was launched. Chechnya is truly a part of Russia. And I'm a lawyer, and I can only speak based on the postures of the Constitution. Chechnya is a part of Russia, and therefore all Russian laws apply to it, as well as the Constitution. Ilyushenko confirmed that the prosecutor is investigating criminal cases regarding the Western group of forces, but there are no cases of corruption, because there is no such concept in our jurisprudence, corruption. There is bribery, and there is abuse of an official post. Furthermore, the Minister of Defense, Pavel Gorbachev, will not be called to accountability for acquiring 2 Mercedes-Benzes, unlawful according to certain mass media. Ilyushenko emphasized that in the current case there is no corpus delicti. I was just told that our technical personnel are receiving video material currently from Nazran about the transfer of Russian prisoners. When the material is ready, we will air it. For now, we continue. A curfew on the entire territory of Ingushetia is declared today by the decree of the President of the Republic of Ingushetia, Ruslan Aushev. This decision was prompted by the escalation of the criminal situation and in order to facilitate means to ensure law and order and the safety of the population. The decision to extend for another 2 months the state of emergency in Baku was adopted today by the National Assembly of Azerbaijan. The state of emergency was declared on the 3rd of October because of the attempted state coup. In accordance to the decision of the Azerbaijani parliament, a special regime of entry into the city is sustained, a ban on rallies, and also restrictions on activities of political parties and movements. While in various parts of our once common country, war situations do not diffuse, representatives of 15 now independent republics traveled 9,000 kilometers along the roads of the CIS and the Baltic states, indeed demonstrating the loyalty of friendship and helping one's neighbor. 9,000-kilometer distance demanded special valor from these people. In the Georgian auditorium of the Moscow Kremlin, the President of Russia today hosted 15 handicapped athletes who completed a super marathon through the CIS and Baltic countries in regions of ethnic contradiction and hot points of conflict. Boris Yeltsin handed them awards of valor. These people, strong of spirit, not only overcame 9,000 kilometers from Petersburg to Almaty, passing through deserts and mountainous vaults, but overcoming fatigue, they obliterated psychological and national barriers, carrying with them the ideas of peace and helping one's neighbor and the faith in kindness. You are the hope for millions of other people who, seeing you, for them, it will be easier to deal with any grief. At this meeting, Boris Yeltsin emphasized that we are simply obliged in daily life to create fully fledged equal conditions for everyone so that no one would sense infringement. Boris Nikolaevich especially remarked on the wheelchairs used in the marathon. The wheelchairs were made in Russia. And this is not only again today's Russia, said the president, but this is proof that our country is increasingly willing to face the problems of the handicapped. Turkmenian gas was turned on to the Transcaucasus republics. This was agreed in Ashgabat by Sapar Murat Niyazev, Levonta Petrosyan, Edvard Shevardnadze, and the Vice President of Azerbaijan, Abar Abbasov. The result of the three-way meeting of the heads of Turkmenia, Armenia, and Georgia was the tripartite joint statement which confirmed the mutual responsibility for fulfilling obligations under that agreement. Aspects of trade economic cooperation were discussed for 1995, interaction in the framework of the CIS, but paramount, as at all previous meetings, was the issue of normalizing mutual transactions for Turkmenian natural gas deliveries. The question was very painful, not only for consumers, but for Turkmenia itself, which has paid its debts sporadically and cannot conduct its planned reforms in full scale, nor achieve the stabilization of the national currency. Also involved in the talks was Azerbaijan, represented in the face of the first Vice Premier Abbasov. After the meeting, an agreement was signed on gas feed for the next year, protocols on mutual deliveries of other goods, and regulating debt operations. Azerbaijan and Armenia, which owe $12 million for gas today, will receive it in announced volumes. The matter is more complex with Georgia, whose Turkmenian currency debt, not including clearing, is $383 million. The president, Sapar Murat Niyazev, said that Turkmenistan takes into account the extreme situation of this Transcaucasian republic, and both countries intend to seek equitable cooperation. Russia is entering a phase of structural crisis, in a sense, the most serious stage of the transitional period to the market economy. This was stated by the head of the economics department of Russia, Evgeny Yasin. He spoke today at the regional meeting in Novosibirsk on the draft budget for 1995. Just recently, Novosibirsk, Russia's largest Asian city and simultaneously the transport gates of the east of Russia, was the object of pride not only for its residents. Its astounding development was facilitated mostly by the military-industrial sector. But now, when the defense sector is simply without orders and simultaneously people without work or salary, the situation here is quite dramatic. Just as in all Russia, the federal authorities again have to listen to reproaches from the regions. And although the current session was dedicated to discussion of the draft budget for 1995, its participants, representing two-thirds of Russia, were more concerned for the future of the country. Bewilderment over the current situation was expressed to the first Vice Premier, Anatoly Chubaits, by directors of the plant SEP Textile Marsh. Previously, each such lathe, built here on the model of the Swiss firm Sulzer Rute, was distributed personally by the Minister of Light Industry. Today, all these lathes are dead weight because no one can afford to purchase them. Meanwhile, we are spending currency to acquire fiber from abroad, although not of the best quality, and at the same time help to create jobs there. In our country, however, the number of unemployed is growing. The leaders of the leading parties and movements of Russia lately noticeably increased their activities in the region. The reason is evident. The parties are recruiting support, preparing for the coming elections for the State Duma and the Federative Council. Today to Chelyabinsk, on the invitation of the regional organization, the Party of the Democratic Choice of Russia, arrived the leader of that party, the deputy of the State Duma, Yegor Gaidar. Speaking before the presidium of the party, Gaidar emphasized that the main aim of the Democratic Choice of Russia is to create a society of free individuals where human rights are the highest priority and are reliably protected. Assessing the situation in the economic and political life of Russia, Gaidar called it extremely complex, but responsibility for failure in executing reforms, despite the obvious impediments created by the opposition, is carried in full measure by the Democrats as well, including the members of the Democratic Choice of Russia. Samara was visited by the chairman of the initiating group on creating a new political party, the Party of Social Democracy, Alexander Nikolaevich Yakovlev. Attending the meeting were doctors, teachers, scientists. Of top priority in its platform are not economic reforms, but the individual with his or her vital interests. In the opinion of the participants of the conference, a dignified sequence in free society must be the following: the person, the society, the state. The delegates elected an organizational committee to create the party headed by the main physician of the Samara Diagnostic Center, Vladimir Fedorovich Sharapov. In the opinion of Alexander Nikolaevich Yakovlev, initially it's necessary to create several regional branches of the party and later hold a pan-Russian founding conference. We will work, first of all, with teachers, physicians, with the technological intelligentsia, with peasants, farmers, with representatives of small and average-sized businesses, with entrepreneurs. I'm speaking about the priorities that we have, because any party can make a selection and a list such as this, but I'm listing in that priority sequence which we feel is in compliance with our platform. We have created the Samara organization in the aims of not confrontation, but to search for accord. Today, the chairman of the government of Russia, Viktor Chernomyrdin, met with the chairman of the Federation of Independent Unions, Mikhail Shmakov. They discussed demands submitted during the pan-Russian action of the union, the 27th of October. An agreement was reached to begin dialogues between the government and the unions on the 6th of December 1994 on issues of payment of debts for salaries and protection against unemployment. The fact that the government is undertaking steps to resolve the non-payment problem is evident by the practice of payment obligations or promissory notes, bills of exchange, issued by the Ministry of Finances of Russia. Details of that operation were clarified today in Moscow at the press center on Zubovsky Boulevard. Representatives of several companies were told that upon receiving these bills of exchange, they can use them to pay for energy, transportation, deliver services, and thereby settle their debts. And this will give them the right to apply their funds to pay salaries. All operations will be conducted through 7 commercial banks. They have been revealed by the Ministry of Finances as a result of a legal tender in which 40 banking institutions participated. The leader of the Department of Industry in the Ministry of Finances, Larisa Lapitskaya, stated that the banks will skim from these operations not more than 3% profits. In the opinion of the Ministry of Finances, the introduction of bills of exchange will finally enable all to break the vicious circle of mutual indebtedness. Which banks were given preference? Minatep, Avtobank, and other banks which stand firmly on their feet. Will it not turn out that as a result of all these operations, companies will in essence become the property of commercial banks? I think realistically there is no such threat. The battle for control over a privatized company more often acquires the form of a scandal. An example of this is the situation around the Krasnoyarsk aluminum plant, which produces 1/5 of Russian aluminum. Last year, the line's share of this metal was exported to countries of distant abroad. Also, the Krasnoyarsk plant is considered to be a plant with relatively new equipment, and therefore, Kras is a dainty morsel for Russian and foreign investors. The plant was privatized, but the administration of Kras in the middle of November changed the electronic register of shareholders, as a result of which a group of Russian companies was deprived of the majority of its securities. Foreign investors were treated no better. They simply were banned from the shareholders' meeting. Stockholder employees of Kras were recommended strictly by the directors not to sell stock to anyone. So what is happening at Kras? Lawyers from the Institute of State and Law qualify the actions of the directors of the plant as a direct violation of the laws. The registered stockholders can only be changed by an arbitration court. The shareholders of Kras, among whom are Raznoimport Volgograd aluminum plant and the company Royal, now have hopes to defend their rights. The change of ownership at the flagman of Russian aluminum industry continues. The President of Russia, Boris Yeltsin, on Sunday will fly to Budapest, where he will participate in the 3rd meeting of the heads of states and governments of the CSCE members. It's expected that the Russian President will deliver a speech at the plenary meeting on Monday in the morning. Apart from that, Boris Yeltsin will also hold several meetings with heads of countries in the CSCE. Today in Brussels, the session of the Council of the North Atlantic Cooperation convened. Our special correspondent, Pavel Ogorodnikov, reports on that session. The Bosnian crisis, executing the program Partnership for Peace, broadening NATO to the east, and cooperation with Russia. These are the main problems of the regular winter session of the North Atlantic Bloc on the level of Ministers of Foreign Affairs, which is occurring in Brussels. Before the beginning of talks with the head of the Russian Foreign Affairs Department, which was attributed top priority, the ministers confirmed their unified position of the bloc regarding Bosnia. Regularizing is possible only through political means. Any military decision will lead to a new escalation in conflict. The same position is adhered to also by the contact group. The failed operation on the protection of the safe haven zone in Bihać because of the Serb aggression was planned by the UN. NATO can't assume responsibility for the deaths among the peaceful population, but in the future it's prepared again to offer its air combat forces to support UN resolutions and the Blue Helmets, it says in the communique. The NATO Council adopted a decision to form a special commission to develop a procedure and schedule for accepting new members into the organization. The preparation of proposals will be given 12 months. The real co-applicants, Warsaw Warsaw, Prague, Budapest, and Bratislava should, within that time, prove the seriousness and well-based intentions upon entering this organization. Russia was offered to approve the new program Partnership Russia-NATO in two parts, military and political, which take into account the status of Russia as a nuclear superpower and is oriented on mutual consultation, information exchange on the formula 16+1. But a sensation occurred. The Russian minister refused to sign the NATO documents. Unfortunately, the communiqué of the NATO Council evokes several questions, and we want to receive answers to them. No, we are not pleased with the rash, unjustified membership expansion of NATO. We feel that it is necessary to exhaust the level of partnership which will give the answer to the question whether or not to enter NATO and who is to enter. In general, we have never excluded the possibility even for ourselves to become NATO members. While the NATO Council discusses the situation in former Yugoslavia, the situation in Bosnia, despite the temporary lull, is far from resolution. News from the combat zones we receive regularly from our correspondent Vladimir Solovyov. For the third day on the fronts of northwest Bosnia, relative calm remains. The combined forces of the Bosnian Serbs and the moderate autonomist Muslims have occupied all access points to Bihać and Velika Kladuša and stopped their counterattack. An intention to become involved in the conflict was unexpectedly announced by the Ministry Department of the neighboring Croatia. According to the Minister of Defense, Gojko Sušić, if the fall of Bihać will be invariable, the Croat army will begin intervention. In the absence of President Franjo Tuđman, whose health is of serious concern for a long time and currently is being treated in one of the private clinics in Latin America, in the higher echelons of Croatia, a power struggle has accelerated. And in this situation, politicians in Zagreb could decide to send forces to neighboring countries. However, the besieged Bihać will probably not be taken. For the Serbs and allies, the street battles in the safe zone will be too costly. They've already achieved their goals here. Despite all efforts of NATO, they've demolished the 5th Corps of the Bosnian Army, and now the leaders of the warring sides offer each other various options of a truce. And the International Contact Group is preparing a new peace plan in which the Bosnian Serbs will be offered the right of confederation with United Yugoslavia. To the main city of the Serbian Republic, Pali, the special representative of the UN in Bosnia-Herzegovina, Isus Jarkaši, arrived. At talks with the leader of the Bosnian Serbs, Radovan Karadzic, the plan of possible ceasefire in northwest Bosnia was discussed, and the demilitarization of Bihać, as well as the fate of almost 400 blue helmets who have become hostages of the policy of bombardments. The crisis near Bihać evidently will be resolved along the same plan as the crisis in Gorazde in the beginning of spring, and the remote enclave has deflected the main attention from the main front in central and eastern Bosnia, where all the basic questions of this war and the future peace will be decided. The visit to Japan of Alexis Kavets has been completed, a visit which was received with diverse reactions. The Vice Premier himself also is very restrained in his assessments. The talks were extremely complicated. On this level, we did everything which we planned. How things will progress, work will show, because today, and for now, there is only a very passive relationship in the area of the economy and trade with Japan. And yet, the most important agreements were signed, including a memorandum which was discussed for almost 20 years regarding the Intergovernmental Commission on Trade Economic Matters. Much more painful were the talks on the Russian debt. It even reached the point where Exim Bank, which finances up to 85% of Japanese developments in our country, raised the question of Russia losing its financial immunity, that is, its ability to pay. And as a result, the freezing of all credits. Tense dialogues during which Alexis Kavets was forced to remember the debts of the former USSR and about the foreign debtors of Russia nonetheless resolved the situation. The Japanese financiers agreed to allot credits for proposed projects, but the so-called humanitarian credit to use not for incremental injections but for investments, but with a humanitarian direction, foremost in the far eastern regions. And one must add that the economic battles were constantly underway on the backdrop of political claims. At times it even seemed that Russian and Japanese sources of mass media are illuminating different visits. We spoke only about the economy, they only about the contentious islands and adjacent fishing territories. Evidently, in the future, the contentious territories will find the development of relations in the course of dialogues. At the same time, the solution is only in the economy. The small Japanese city Nomuro is located in the northeast of the country, quite close to the Russian South Kuril Islands. To Kaneshiro, it's a stone's throw away, and the problem of inhabiting these areas for Japanese and Russians alike are similar in many ways. Both are fed by the sea, and both suffer when natural disasters hit. The earthquake, which caused so much grief in the autumn of this year to the Russian residents of the Kuril Islands, didn't leave their southern neighbors, the Japanese, indifferent. As a result of gathering funds, it was possible to load up several transport containers with foods, medications, personal hygiene objects, clothing, fuel, and even many electrical stations to the sum of approximately $800,000. Here in Nomuro, they well understand what an earthquake is. All these 15 transport containers are filled with humanitarian aid acquired through the donations of regular Japanese citizens. Mrs. Kodama Taiko was born herself on the Green Island and visited the Kuril Islands several times in order to aid victims there. And there are many here, such as she. The ship, which embarked on its voyage in early morning, delivered its cargo to its destination. People helped people. The new president of the Mexican United States, Ernesto Cedillo, took office today during a triumphant inaugural ceremony held in the National Congress of the Republic. In the presence of his predecessor on the highest government post, Carlos Salinas, on the shoulders of the new head of state, a tri-colored presidential ribbon was draped, a symbol of his state powers, which, according to the Constitution, he will have to exercise until the 30th of November, the year 2000. For participation in the ceremony, esteemed delegations arrived in Mexico from more than 70 countries of the world. The American President, Bill Clinton, positively assessed the results of the voting in the Senate of the House of Congress on the World Trade Agreement in the framework of GATT. At a press conference, the head of the administration thanked the legislators and expressed hope that this vote would lay the beginning for close cooperation between the administration and the Republicans who recently acquired the majority in both chambers of Congress. The World Trade Agreement, over which during the course of 8 years 3 American administrations had worked, foresees the world's largest reduction of import tariffs. At least 24 people have died and 124 are considered to be missing as a result of a collision in a Manilan bay of a Filipino ferry with a Singapore dry cargo ship. 15 minutes after the accident, the passenger ship, with more than 600 people on board, sank, and the crew of the cargo ship, which managed to maintain its buoyancy, sprang onto its decks. 230 passengers who survived, many of whom spent 2 hours in water. 219 more were saved by motorboats of the Coast Guard. The 70th launch of the European carrier ship Ariane from the spacepad Kourou in French Guyana ended in failure. 12 minutes after it was launched, the rocket began to lose elevation. Judging from the tracking devices, the Ariane fell into the sea together with the American satellite Ansat-3, which was on board. 3 women and 1 man, Russian tourists, burned alive in one of the hotels of a Chinese border town, Soihinhe. 6 more Russians were sent by Chinese medical personnel to the emergency unit with severe burns and smoke inhalation. There is no news on their condition for now. The Russian casualties of the fire were members of a tourist group which arrived in Soihinhe with a 1-day shopping tour through the Vladivostok travel agency. Today, the President of Russia, by his decree, relieved the Major General Yevgeny Sevastianov, the Deputy Director of the Federal Service of Counterintelligence of Russia, the head of the Department of the FSK in Moscow, from his post. This was announced by the press service of the Russian President. Information agencies all evening tonight are reporting that armed, camouflaged individuals have surrounded the high-rise building on Novy Arbat in Moscow and will not let anyone out of the building. Several stories in that building are occupied by Most Bank. Our correspondent has just returned from that site. For almost 17 hours, special units of unknown affiliation blockaded the former SEF building on New Arbat Street, where the offices are located of the financial group Most. At around 7 p.m., the Most group informed mass media of a press conference, but journalists were not permitted in the building. The armed representatives of forces of law and order would not allow anyone closer than 30 meters, warning that in the event of contradicting the order, they'd open fire. In the on-duty station of the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Moscow, they stated that that near the mayor's office building, official operational measures were being undertaken. Our film crew managed to learn that automatic gunmen penetrated the building and detained its guards. Those detained were searched and photographed. According to unofficial information from law enforcement organs, the actions of law enforcement services are not directed against Most Bank. However, representatives of the Most group said they don't believe that version. In connection with events near the mayor's office, the Association of Russian Banks issued a statement in which it's confirmed that the 2nd of December, the building was in essence seized by unknown armed units. According to certain sources in the blockaded building, a press conference is underway. We have no other information at this hour. Now information for those television viewers who follow television programs through the weekly publication 7 Days. Evidently, such viewers will increase in the near future. Television has been in color for a long time, but Russian newspapers which write about it remain in black and white. To change the situation was the decision of the producers of the weekly 7 Days, whose bright renewed edition appeared today. The new authors are attempting to combine the popular format of 7 Days with a new elegant content. I'll name several people who have contributed help to this issue. They are the famous journalist Yuri Rost, the director of cinema and the Duma deputy Yuri Guzman, Yegor Yakovlev. In our country, in most cases, they write about and around television in search of readers' demand. The authors of the newspaper feel, evidently to avoid fading popularity, 7 days apart from traditional television program schedules, intend to include reviews, ratings, and culinary recipes taken down from the screen. The weekly 7 Days hasn't yet managed to report that this evening on television company Ostankino, in the regular program, the only source of dubbed films being prepared by our agency, will feature the French film The Nylon Blouse. The French film The Nylon Blouse, and also fragments from documentary films There Was Snow in the Morning, God Gave Her a Mercedes-Benz, Babia Strasse, or Tales of America. Everything featuring feminine charm and attractiveness. During these very moments, in the great auditorium of the Russian Musical Academy, in the name Knyazin, there is a concert of young singers underway, laureates of the international competitions in Barcelona. The concert is underway, but we haven't yet prepared our report. Therefore, the sports news with Daria Chervonenko after the ads. All the best. Good evening, and now you will see the special report which we have just brought back from the finals of the Davis Cup. Good evening, and unconditionally, today's main event is the finals of the Davis Cup, which was attended by the President of Russia, Boris Yeltsin, and the President of the International Olympic Committee, Juan Antonio Samaranch. And let's see how things developed here today. I came here in order to see the finals of the Davis Cup, in which the Russian team is playing for the first time. And what can you say about Russian players? Your players undoubtedly play very well, yet I feel that they lack the experience of participating in finals of such a prestigious tournament. And so, after the difficult and tense singles match, Alexander Volkov lost to Stefan Edberg in 5 straight sets. Did you feel that you could win? I was certain of that until the last ball, when I served 4 balls and 1 ball I played incorrectly tactically. That was the match ball, and I paid for it and lost. Simply, sports luck was on the side of the stronger. Edberg is slightly higher in class than Volkov, but in principle, as far as playing ability, I can say that Volkov played one of his best matches. And a little later on the courts, Evgeny Kafelnikov and Magnus Larsson appeared, and here, only after 5 sets, victory was held by the Swedish player. 6.5 points of possible 8 were won by the first men's team of Russia in the first 2 tournaments of the World Chess Olympics in Moscow. In their second match, the hosts, with a score of 3-1, beat the Cubans. The most tense was the match between Vladimir Kramnik and the famous player Jesus Nageris. Playing the blacks, he managed to lead the match to a tie. A great victory was held at the international vocal competitions in the name Francesco Vinyasa, which was held in Spain. Our young opera singers, scholarship students of the Benevolent Fund of Culture of the Russian Credo Bank, which is headed by the famous singer Natalia Troitskaya. In this prestigious competition, there were 192 representatives from 39 countries of the world, and our vocalists, who represented the Tbilisi Opera Theatre, the Opera Theatre of Ekaterinburg, and Moscow, received 3 first prizes of 7. The results of the competition again confirmed that Russia has not grown poor in talents, and Russian culture is previously as rich and multifaceted, but needs aid. For the second year, we've been sending singers to that competition because previously this was done by the State Concert Committee and the government paid. Now there's no one to pay, so we've taken on this mission ourselves. My aim and the aim of our fund is that these young people should always live in Russia and always return here, that they'd have a house here which awaits them. The level of culture is the level and prestige of the country. May there be more patrons from those who value the future of our art. Good evening. As always at this time, information from the Oceanic Meteorological Center of Russia. In the ancient Russian name for December was the gelling month, hence everything grows still with cold. They also said it frowned. The sky knits its brows with clouds. To the polar Ural and Nenetsk Autonomous District, the Republic of Komi, cold Arctic air continues to seep in, therefore it will remain cold, and cold weather with snow and blizzards during the day, -8 to 13, in polar Ural as low as -16. On the Kola Peninsula, in the Ostankinos district, in Karelia, in the zone of an atmospheric front, which is dividing the cold and warm air, it's cloudy with some light snow, temperatures around 0. In the Ostankinos district, -3 to 5. Residents of the Kaliningrad district and the Baltic countries will see some clear weather with temperatures of 0 plus 5. That will be the influence of a zone of high pressure. An atmospheric front will bring inclement weather with isolated snows and blizzards to the central regions of Russia along the Volga and to the lower Don. During the day, -3 to 8. In the central Chernozem area, it's 3 to 4 degrees warmer. On the lower Volga and in Kalmykia, some light precipitation during the day, 0 -4 degrees. In the republics of the Northern Caucasus, in the Stavropol and Krasnodar Rim areas, with isolated precipitation. In the mountains, snow falls with snow slides possible, 0 -3 degrees. In Ukraine and Belarus, there will be thick, dense clouds with isolated precipitation. The reason for that is an atmospheric front which is coming in from the northwest during the day, 0 plus 3. In Moldova, partly cloudy skies, 0 plus 5. It's rainy and cloudy beyond the Caucasus. This is the influence of a lethargic atmospheric front. In Georgia and Azerbaijan, the highest +8 degrees. In Armenia, around 0.